on in. Just be careful with mine. Okay. All right, we'll get started. India, so today we're going to talk about India, Southeast Asia, China, Japan, Korea, and Vietnam. What I would normally cover in 3 days, 3 lectures, I'm going to try to cover in one. All right. Essentially, the political history of India after about the year 1000 was a story of disunity. You know, India was not able to unite itself, and occasionally a kingdom would become more powerful than the other. But in India, their religion called for unity, but in actual reality, they never achieved it. And even today, India is divided into India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Nepal. They have not been able to unite themselves. They want badly to unite themselves, but Islam is keeping them from it. Anyway, persons who have compared the history of, done some world history comparisons will note that Europe and China and India all declined about the same time around the 400s, 3 and 400 CE, 3 and 400 in a common era. And the decline might have been due to a cooling down of the climate. This cannot be proven that far back. Now, you get to the 1600s, it can be proven, and you get even to the 1300s, which we talked about before this semester, that it can be proven. That apparently the climate changes, drops down to 300 years, 350 years, 300, 350. And if I'm right, then we're due for another little ice age, maybe a big ice age, in a matter of a few years. But anyway, we'll just wait and see. But anyway, India was declining and unable to unite themselves. And keep in mind, too, India is farther south than much of China, and farther south than all of Europe. And in normal times, they don't have anything that can be called snowfall. They have tropical climate. But nevertheless, the climate change, there was a cooling, seems to have affected their crops, led to some instances of starvation. All right. The Silk Road, oh yes. I must mention, Silk Road. During this time period, from the 300s, 400s, until 1500, the Silk Road went through northern India. Now the Silk Road joined China in the Mediterranean world, and the Silk Road did a lot to enrich India. In fact, I did not mention the Silk Road did a lot to enrich the Arabs too, and it was one of the things that really upset Mohammed, because he had been born into poverty, then all of a sudden he became wealthy, and he could not reconcile the poverty he'd grown up with. I mean, poor people think of the rich as being snakes, and it's like he grew up. I mean, he woke up one morning and found out, hey, I'm the snake that I always criticize others for being, and it greatly affected him. But anyway, the Silk Road changed routes several times through the ages, depending on the political situation and how well that the kings and rulers of these places could protect the merchants. But during most of this time went through northern India and helped enrich northern India. In fact, Rome actually built a bunch of cities along India's western coast. The Romans occupied part of India for a time, built cities along the western coast. Eventually these cities were absorbed. But India became rich, partly, it's the northern part of it, became rich by the trade that the Silk Road bought them. All right. Now, the rise of Buddhism. Buddhism also brought wealth to India, and that the Buddhist monks would build elaborate monasteries. And these monks did not demand anything much for themselves, just a little bit to eat, a little bit to wear, but they lived in poverty, much like European monks. But they, nevertheless, they were able to collect a whole lot of wealth and a whole lot of money, which none of them did not benefit any one of them individually, but benefited the whole monastery. And the kings of India were able to tax these monasteries and get some wealth from them. So the monasteries helped build up wealth in India also. Now, particularly the Buddhist monasteries. Your book introduces you to the word feudalism. Now, we're going to run into the word again when we come to Japan. There was a little bit of feudalism in India, a little bit of feudalism in Japan, but feudalism became the dominant political scene in Europe during the Middle Ages. Essentially, in a few words as possible, feudalism is where the nobles are in charge. Now, you have a king, but the king has almost no authority. He's not much more than a figurehead. And under the king are nobles. The nobles give lip service to being subservient to the king, but actually the nobles run the place and they're in charge. And that's what you had in Europe during the Middle Ages. You had in India during this time too, and to some extent for a time you had it in Japan. Feudal system, the nobility run it, nobility are in charge, and the king is little more than a feudal lord. He has a title and not much else. All right. Now, Buddhism. For a time, Buddhism started to take over India. And it looked like Buddhism was going to replace Hinduism. And it might have done so, except for the fact that Hinduism underwent some changes. Now, the appeal that Buddhism had, Buddhism stressed more egalitarian than Hinduism, and also the lower caste, particularly the untouchables, the other lower castes, found that they believed they could go more quickly to their ultimate state of existence. To put it in European terms, they could get to heaven faster under Buddhism than they could under Hinduism. Again, Buddhism began to soon start to take over. A lot of your Indian kings became Buddhist. And the Hindus realized, hey, we've got to do something about this. So Hinduism reformed itself. For instance, Hinduism changed its elaborate rituals that only a few people had time for. They made the rituals more simple and more easy to understand and more easy for the common person to grasp. And also, Hinduism changed to where that they made the ordinary person feel like he had a better chance of getting to nirvana in the next life. Now, Buddhism also had another problem, in that Buddha's sayings were not written down until 200 years after he died. Now, folks, if you study comparative religions, some of these religions do not know exactly what the founder said. Now, I have 200 years, all right, let's still think about 200 years ago in this country. It was 1818, and that was the year James Monroe was president. Nobody alive remembers him, of course. Nobody alive knows anybody who once remembered him. I mean, 200 years is a long time. But Buddha's sayings are written down, but here's the problem. The people in this part said that Buddha said this. Over here, these people said Buddha said that. To this day, we don't know what Buddha actually said. Now, this same thing is true of Islam. When somebody finally, when the caliph who succeeded Muhammad finally decided to write his sayings down, he apparently went all over Arabia, but he missed some of them. Until today, there's debate among persons, well, hey, the writings I have should be in the Quran, and these writings should be left out, and we don't know which writings should be included and which writings shouldn't. Among the Christians, the Christian Bible, there's more agreement than there is among with the other religions. Now, we hasten to state, if you talk to an Islamic person, he's going to tell you, oh, the Quran is holy and it hasn't changed. It's the same way, and it's so holy it can't even be translated to another language. And his sayings are pure, and it says pure. But other persons who have looked at it have decided, hey, it appears that Muhammad said some things that didn't make the Quran, and some of the things that are in the Quran he possibly did not say. This has created a lot of debate. Well, this same debate was going on in Hinduism at the time. What did Buddha actually say? And to this day, we don't know. Then you had a group, and this is a problem with every religion. One group called the Purists said, we're going to try to keep Buddhism the way it always has been. Another group said, no, we've got to adapt to the times. We've got to adjust the time. Now, this is a problem with every religion also. When the religions start bumping into other people, and like, for instance, a religion that says that women are property bumps into other religions that say that women are not property, there's a conflict there. And this has happened all down through the ages. Doctrines get tested and tried and oftentimes changed. But anyway, Buddhism ran into situations where they did encounter things that Buddha didn't encounter. And to give you an example, for instance, Muhammad never encountered smoking tobacco. But a lot of Islamic people believe it's wrong to smoke tobacco, even though Muhammad never mentioned it. Again, this is part of what you run into as time goes on. Situations come up that the original founder never had to deal with. So Buddhism underwent some changes. Buddhism split. And then one group in Buddhism said, no, if we just simply try to be good, that's enough, just be good. But another group said, no, it's a matter of devotion. It reminds me of the Christian concept of justification by works or justification by faith. The one group says you have to be good enough to get in. Another group says, no, you just have to believe to get in. But anyway, the Buddhism split over something of the same issue. Again, it's interesting to note that these civilizations and these religions oftentimes have a lot of parallels, often have debates that are similar, different maybe in the words they use, but similar in nature. Buddhism began to decline as time went on. Why did it decline? Well, some people have said it was because it tried to undermine the class distinctions or the caste system that was so much a part of the Indian, you might say, the Indian makeup. The caste, in other words, where I'm better than you because I'm of a higher caste than you are. I was born to a higher caste, so I'm better than you. The Indian people seem to enjoy that. And Buddhism denied this caste distinction. So Buddhism declined. And after a while, now Buddhism is still powerful in India, but it's taken a second place. Hinduism has remained the dominant religion in India now for, well, hundreds of years. Now, I've got to hasten to say, though, that when you come to Southeast Asia, both Buddhism and Hinduism sent missionaries into this part of the world to try to convert these people, and even here in China. In Southeast Asia, Hinduism became dominant. In Southeast Asia, Buddhism became dominant. But in India, Hinduism remained dominant. And again, there have been many books written as to why this was, but probably the main reason was this caste system that Buddhism tried to undermine. And the Hindus wanted to keep it. All right. In the meantime, another religion came from outside and threatened both. Islam. Islam started out here in Arabia and marched, defeated Persia, as we've already talked about, and then went into northern India. Now, again, folks, I emphasize the geography. If you know anything about the geography of this region, it was mostly treeless, bushless, not a land of that was suitable for vegetation. But then you get into this part of India here, and there's vegetation. The Islamic armies did not do well in jungles, in areas with a lot of trees, in areas with a lot of bushes. Their armies would swoop down on horseback and cut enemy armies to pieces on horseback, but they would do it in desert-like terrain. Give the enemy bushes and trees, undergrowth, brush. They didn't do well. Anyway, Islam, to make a long story short, Islam was able to get much of northern India, including what is today Pakistan, what is today Bangladesh, and what is today Nepal. But Islam did not get much of the rest of India, and that remains true even in the year 2018. The Indians have this. The Islamic people have 3 countries here: Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Nepal. Now, one reason that Islam was able to take over the part of northern India was the Indian kings were disunited and quarreling among themselves. In other words, if India had been united, I'm certain they could have kept Islam at bay. They were not united. But the Indian kings quarreled among themselves, and this did a lot to undermine them. Also, the Indian armies used elephants. Muslim armies used horses. The horse proved to be a better battle weapon than the elephant. I mean, if you can imagine sitting on the back of an elephant, fighting back and up, I mean, if you're like me, you'd be afraid of falling off. I mean, it's bad enough to fall off a horse. A fall from the back of an elephant would be fatal. I mean, and also, I mean, the horses are a lot faster. And speed is important because if you're faster than the enemy, that means if you don't want to fight him, you can just run off. And he can't run from you. So that gives you a big advantage. Horses are faster than elephants. Eventually, though, the Indian soldiers learned how to use horses, and the elephants took a back seat. Another thing, though, that hurt the Islamic advance was something unexpected happened. Over the horizon, right here in Mongolia, came a ruler named Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan, he started off by uniting all the Mongolians, something had never been done. Then he conquered part of China. Several years ago, I made a mistake of saying he conquered China. He didn't conquer all of it. He conquered part of China. Then he moved west, and he kept the Islamic people busy fighting him. And he was able to give Islam a taste of their own medicine, you might say. His armies behaved much like their armies, and his armies would operate from horseback, cavalry, but his armies were better at it than the Islamic armies. I'm going to give you some idea of the toughness of the Mongolian. When they crossed into this area here, they would subsist on opening up the veins of their horses, opening up one of the veins, sucking the blood out, part of the blood out of that horse, then closing the vein up, and going for a couple of days and doing the same thing again, opening the vein of a horse, sucking. But they got a lot of nourishment this way, and they became really, really tough, hardened soldiers. And even the Islamic armies were not able to stand up to them. But again, the Mongolians had, we're going to talk later how the Mongolians had trouble when they went to Vietnam. Vietnam is the land of jungles, and you just can't fight from horseback, swooping cavalry, mounted cavalry in the jungle. And the United States itself even found fighting in Vietnam to be really, really hard, almost impossibly hard. I mean, anyway, by the way, Islam never made any headway at all in Vietnam, no significant headway. But the Mongolians did conquer them for a while, but they were not able to hold on to them. Now, your book then goes to talk about some differences between the Islam and Muslim, between the Islam and Muslim. For instance, one difference is that Muslims eat beef, Hindus do not. And this meant that the Muslims did not mind killing the cattle they found to sell the cattle at market as beef, and the Hindus find this practice very, very offensive. I want to say on a personal note, Lockheed made it a point to hire people from these countries so that they would buy our airplanes. And in our department one day, there came a Hindu man and a Pakistani who was Muslim. And at first, they didn't get along at all. But then, they realized that, hey, we have more in common with each other. We have these American people here. So after a while, they became buddy-buddies. They even invited each other to their homes. Never mind that one of them ate beef and the other one didn't. They began to overlook their differences and realized that they could get along over here. Unfortunately, one of them only lived about 50 years and died of throat cancer. The other one, the last account I had, was a supervisor at Lockheed now. But anyway, the two sides have hated each other from the beginning. Now, Hinduism had some practices that simply could not fly in the modern world. And one of these practices was a practice of Zanj, Z-A-N-J, where that a Hindu woman, when her husband died, would throw herself on a fire and burn herself to death. You might ask, what's the purpose of this? Well, the purpose of it was so this woman would not go on to become a burden to her family, so just simply get rid of her by having her burn herself to death. The Muslims did nothing to stop this practice. Another practice they had was the child marriages, for instance, particularly 9-year-old, 10-year-old girls getting married. Now, let's picture it this way. A man might feel like he was not financially stable enough to get married until he was in his mid to late 30s. So picture a 39-year-old man marrying a 9-year-old girl. Guess which one of them is going to live the longest? And guess which one of them is going to have to burn herself in the fire when her husband died? Well, see, the purpose of this was they gave the wife incentive to see that her husband stayed alive as long as she could keep him alive. It gave her an incentive and also kept her being a burden to society. Now, like I said, this practice was not going to fly in the modern world. Once they came into contact with Europeans who frowned heavily on it, the practice of child marriage also. But Islam did nothing to stop this. The Islamic people, just said, let them be what they are. It was left up to the British who conquered India several generations later to try to put a stop to this. Of course, the practice of keeping some certain people as outcasts, permanently impoverished, Islam did nothing to stop this also. Now, speaking of child marriages, in case you haven't heard, Muhammad himself married a 9-year-old girl. And before you start thinking of him as being a pedophile, this was a common practice in the world that he lived in. So he was just doing what other people in his day did. He wasn't any better or worse than the people of his day. Because, again, this was a common, and I also keep in mind that life in those days was really short. Also, if you look closer in the life of Muhammad, it is now believed that he was poisoned by a woman who was his cook. But anyway, leaving that for the moment. Islam was egalitarian. Hinduism was not. In other words, Islam basically said that everybody can go directly to Allah. You don't need priests. Everybody is on the same level. Hinduism said, no, some people are better than others, and the better people are likely to nirvana quicker than other people. So Hinduism was hierarchical. Islam egalitarian. This made some differences also between the two groups. But the two groups did borrow from each other. The Hindu rulers were divine, and some Muslim kings thought, hey, that's a great idea. Why don't I make myself divine too? And so some of these Muslim kings began to make themselves divine. And also the Islamic people believe that women should be kept under seclusion and kept out of sight. And a lot of a lot of Hindu men decided, hey, this is a good idea. I'll keep my wife and my daughters out of sight also. So basically, the point your book is making is the two groups copied some things from each other and some things they didn't copy. Both groups borrowed a little bit from each other, but they never did like each other enough to unite, and this has remained true to this day. Now, I have had some Indian people in my class, Hindu people that is, not American, but Hindu people in my class, and they tell me that Pakistan and Nepal and Bangladesh was converted at sword point, by fire and sword. If you actually research it, in some cases it appears that this is true. It depends, you can't make a blanket statement, again, it depends on the location and the time. In some locations, at sometimes, yes, the Muslims did convert at sword point. And in other locations, other times, they did not. Anyway, eventually though, the Hindu people learned how to keep the Islamic people at bay, and the Islamic people never did really learn how to fight in areas with a lot of bushes and a lot of trees and a lot of undergrowth, a lot of brush. Never did. So Islam was kept at bay. Oh yes, I mentioned Genghis Khan. I must mention Tamerlane also. Tamerlane did a lot to keep the Islamic people busy. He conquered a lot of. He was related to Genghis Khan. I believe Genghis Khan was his maternal grandmother or something like that. But he did a lot to keep Islam from bothering India and gave the people of India some respite. But eventually, and this is where our story of India will end, in 1492, some dirty, ragged, scurvy-infested Europeans arrived in India. Nobody would have thought that these dirty, ragged Europeans would conquer India, but that's exactly what happened. The first ones arrived not in 1492, the first ones arrived in 1497. These Portuguese were welcomed at first, but then eventually what it led to was Great Britain conquered India, and that's a whole different story. That's for second semester world history. Now, hopefully all of you know that Great Britain once had 13 colonies here in North America, and Georgia was one of the 13. And when Great Britain lost these 13 colonies, they went to India to conquer India to, you might say, save face, or to get back some of what they had lost. All right, moving on. Now, before I go into the part in Southeast Asia, a couple of things I must say that I forgot to say about the last lesson. Number one, last class, I was trying to think there were three things that Islam gave the world. One of them was algebra, and one of them was Arabic numerals, but the third one was the number zero. You may have heard zero as an actual number, and without the number zero, you cannot do arithmetic, not the way we know it, because the number zero is sometimes inserted in the middle, like 1024, 1024. So it's, again, the Roman numerals did not have the number zero. Number zero is a very important invention that they gave. And another thing, the word Islam means, and I meant to mention this, the word Islam means submission. Everything about Islam is submission. Submission to Allah first, and submission to authority, submission to father, submission even to older brother. All right, Southeast Asia. There's one thing about Southeast Asia that reminds me a little bit of the United States. Southeast Asia is a melting pot of a whole lot of languages and ethnic groups. Now, with Southeast Asia, I'm talking about this area on the map here in the green. Not the Philippines, but this area, including Vietnam and these islands along here, not Australia. Our book doesn't deal with them, not now anyway. But Singapore, the Dutch, what is today called Indonesia, this region. There are at least 1,000 languages spoken here, and some of them do not seem to have any relatives in those. languages that are not related to any other languages, and it's difficult to tell where the people came from. It's believed that the people in Southeast Asia moved in waves. Now, how is this like the United States? The United States also was a melting pot, but with one very important exception. I mean, we have a melting pot of religions, a melting pot of ethnic groups. We have Asian people, African people, European people, and Native American people. But with one very important difference, one language became the dominant speech of the people who came.